obviously it remains, as it has been since this conflict began, a complicated picture here on the ground. However, you know, on the front lines here in Georgia, to quote the Georgia National Security Advisor, we are seeing the pullback of Russian troops. But obviously, there's a host of questions that remain that you have indeed highlighted. Where are those troops going? What's going to be their nature of their force and their deployment and their mobility, and what is it that they're going to do? Now, what we're hearing is that certainly a number of checkpoints on both fronts, both the western front and the eastern front, are being dismantled. Yet at the same time, some checkpoints are remaining. We're hearing about the movement of Russian armour and troops out of undisputed Georgian territory, yet we're also aware that there are some units that have yet to pull back. And we also hear from the Georgian Ministry of Interior that indeed some of these Russian forces are merely stripping off their uniforms and donning so-called peacekeeping gear, or indeed slapping on white armbands or white straps on their helmets to designate themselves as peacekeepers. Bottom line is that whilst the Russians are pulling back to the disputed, largely pro-Russian enclaves of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, under the agreement as it stands, with its current wording, it's wide enough to literally drive a Russian armoured column straight through the middle of it. And indeed, that's what we're seeing. The Russians are insisting that they're able to maintain a security or buffer zone for the protection of their forces. What's in dispute is just how far is that buffer zone going to extend into Georgia proper, and what will the troops within those areas or that zone, these peacekeepers, be able to do? We're hearing a range from 7 kilometres into Georgia to as much as 10 kilometres into Georgia, and regardless, they'll be strategically well placed, and they'll be in such a position as to be able to maintain the ability to exert pressure, not just on whatever Georgian forces there may be, but also on Georgia's key economic infrastructure. Reggie?
And Michael, I just want to ask something real quick just to get it clear. Those white bands, is this a disguise that they are putting on, or is this part of the agreement that they would essentially become these peacekeeping forces?
Well, no. This still largely fits within the broad letter of the agreement, or within the broader context of its spirit. I mean, you need to bear in mind, these areas have been contested for well over a decade. There has been the presence of Russian troops here in the form of peacekeepers for a long, long time. So under the agreement, reverting back to that role, or the deployment of other peacekeepers, is technically a viable option for the Russians to exercise, and it's one that they clearly are.
Okay.
Under the agreement, it stipulates that all forces pull back to the positions where they were before the conflict. It doesn't say what they have to do or how many there have to be.